Dialectic of envy. Envy is the most concealed of human emotions, not just because it's the most despicable, but because it is essentially made up of an unsolvable conflict between self-loathing and the yearning for self-worth. The soul, divided, speaks outwardly with the voice of pride and inwardly with that of contempt, never achieving that unity of intention and tone that marks true sincerity. As far as I know, the only openly envious character in world literature is Romeo's nephew by Diderot, caricature so exaggerated that it defies reality. Even Dostoevsky's underground man only confesses on paper because he believes no one will read it. People admit to hatred, humiliation, fear, jealousy, sorrow, and greed. But envy? Never. The moment envy is admitted, it would cancel itself out, transforming into honest competition or resigned surrender. Envy is the one emotion that thrives on its own concealment. A man becomes envious when he secretly gives up on the goods he coveted, believing in his heart that he doesn't deserve them. What torments him is not the lack of those goods, but the lack of merit. Hence his compulsion to devalue those goods, to destroy them, or to replace them with miserable imitations, pretending to value the latter more than the originals. It is precisely through these dissimulations that envy reveals itself most clearly. There are many forms of dissimulation, but the essential, primordial envy targets spiritual goods because they are more abstract and intangible, more capable of arousing in the envious that feeling of irremediable exclusion that makes them, in life, condemned souls. Material wealth and worldly power are never as distant or incomprehensible as Abel's friendship with God, which drives Cain to despair, or the mysterious gift of creative genius, which humiliates mediocre minds even when they are socially and economically successful. Behind vulgar envy, there is always spiritual envy, but spiritual envy changes its focus with the times. Modern era, as Lionel Trilling explains in Beyond Culture, 1964, is the first in which many men aspire to high achievements in the arts, and in their frustration form a dispossessed class, proletariat of the spirit. New motives require new dissimulations. The proletariat of the spirit is, as Otto Maria Carpo observed in Ascenza de Purgatorio, 1943, the revolutionary class par excellence. Since the French Revolution, the bulk of ideological mass movements' leaders have been drawn from the crowd of resentful semi-intellectuals, alienated from manual labor by the education they received, yet separated from achievement in letters and the arts by their endemic mediocrity. What remained for revolt? But a revolt in the name of ineptitude would discredit itself immediately. The only one to confess it, with suicidal candor, was precisely Romeo's nephew. Warned by this cruel caricature, the others realized that they needed the camouflage of a noble pretext. The poor and oppressed served this purpose well. The ease with which every revolutionary sheds tears of pity for them while fighting against the establishment, only to oppress them as soon as they gain power, can only be explained by the fact that it was not the material suffering of the poor that moved them, but only their own psychic. The rights of the poor are the hallucinogenic potion with which the activist intellectual intoxicates himself, delusions about the motives of his conduct. And it is the inner drama of spiritual envy that gives his discourse that hypnotic emotional intensity that W.B. Yeats noted in The Apostles of the Worst, see The Second Coming, and The Leaders of the Crowd in Michael Robarts and the Dancer, 1921. No genuine feeling expresses itself with a fury comparable to that of hysterical posturing. Ironically, what gave rise to the grand guignol of modern revolutions was not exclusion, but inclusion. It was when the doors of higher cultural activities were opened to the middle and lower classes that inevitably the number of frustrated literati multiplied by millions. The rebellion of the masses that José Ortega y Gasset referred to, the Revolt of the Masses, 1930, consisted precisely in this, not in the rise of the poor to higher culture, but in the concomitant impossibility democratizing genius. The resulting envy generated hatred for the very goods newly acquired, which seemed all the more inaccessible to souls as they became more democratized in the world. Hence the general outcry against elite culture, at the very moment when it was no longer a privilege of the elite. Ortega, in a manner as unjust as it was understandable, was accused of elitism for this. But Erich Hofer, a worker elevated by his own merit to the level of a great intellectual, also wrote penetrating pages on the psychology of activists, pseudo-intellectuals, verbose and full of pose. Living sterile and useless lives, they lack self-confidence and self-respect, and yearn for the illusion of weight and importance. The Ordeal of Change, 1952. So, readers, do not be surprised when you see in the leadership of social movements, citizens from middle and upper-class backgrounds, graduates of the most expensive universities, as is the case with Mr. João Pedro Stedile, an economist from Pusares. If these movements were genuinely for the poor, they would be content with the fulfillment of their nominal demands: a piece of land, a house, tools for work. But the void in the heart of the activist intellectual, the black hole of spiritual envy, is as deep as the abyss of hell. Not even the whole world can fill it. That's why the reasonable demand for the simplest goods of life, the initial hope of the masses, always ends up expanding, under the leadership's initiative, into the insane demand for a total transformation of reality, a revolutionary mutation of the world. And in the chaos of revolution, the hopes of the poor are always sacrificed to the glory of the activist intellectual.